church? Hell no. Are you no longer feeling comfortable in church? This podcast is for individuals who are desperately missing God, but don't know how to find Him. Substance abuse, domestic violence, sex offenses, acrimonious divorce can contribute to discomfort in the church. For these individuals, church is just not an option anymore. Ordained minister Dennis Hall and his guests invite you to listen to this podcast for topics that are inspiring, uplifting, and will bring hope to those who just feel church is not relevant in their lives today.
I'm Dr. Dennis Hall, and I am delighted that you're with us on our podcast today. These are interesting times in America, especially on the political scene. You know, it wasn't very long ago, just a few days ago, that 130 million people were watching the Super Bowl, the NFL championship game. This set not just an all-time record for people watching the Super Bowl, but it's an all-time record for a television program. Unbelievable viewership. And if you watch this game, then you probably noticed that there seemed to be a unity theme, especially in some of the commercials. In one commercial, legendary entertainer Snoop Dogg engages with former New England Patriots quarterback Tom Brady in, I guess, what could be labeled an anti-hate offering. The exchange went something like this. I hate you because we from different neighborhoods. I hate you because you look different. I hate you because I don't understand. I hate you because people that I know hate you. I hate you because I think you hate me. Then across the screen, we read, reasons for hate are as stupid as they sound. And then we hear Snoop say, man, I hate that things are so bad that we have to do a commercial about it. Now, I don't know about you, but my initial reaction to this commercial was that it was targeting the anti-Semitism that has emerged in our country. And then I began to think about the hatred aimed at Hamas and the Palestinians. And of course, this commercial was produced on the heels of the January 1 attack on Bourbon Street in New Orleans by an apparent Islamic extremist. And then, as last week unfolded, I began to observe on television newscasts showing congressmen and senators, local politicians, and others in what's being called the 50501 protest. The 50-51 protest aimed at the newly elected president and his consultant, Elon Musk. These people were yelling and screaming and shouting profanity, some of the worst profane words that we have available, all aimed at the president and aimed to fight specifically his efforts to bring efficiency to the government, eliminate corruption, and remove DEI programs in government institutions. Now, look, even today, I saw analysis showing previous presidents from Clinton and Obama and others really stating the same goals that this president has in terms of removing inefficient activities from our government, removing things that are costly, getting rid of corruption. And now, the same party that had those similar goals seems to be singing a different tune. You know, American voters overwhelmingly elected Donald Trump to carry out his Make America Great Again agenda, despite all the Democrats calling him a threat to democracy. Several Democrats, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known as AOC, have called for a halt to President Trump's cabinet nominations. She in particular vowed to blow this place up. And Democrats, like House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, told Americans to fight Trump's agenda. To fight Trump's agenda in the streets. What's that mean? It's interesting to reflect on the Democratic promises during 2024. The promises that they were the party who would protect democracy and uphold the rule of law. They seem to be dancing to the beat of a new drum in 2025 with civil disobedience and actions filled with profanity and threats of violence. It just appears to me that the Trump administration is following through on an agenda that the American people overwhelmingly voted for. The overwhelming majority of American people are demanding that efficiency be brought to our federal government, and that corruption be eliminated, and that these should be the priorities of this new administration, and that DEI programs be eliminated in government institutions. Now, let me just pause here. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say DEI programs, I don't know. Maybe you've been asleep during all these podcasts over the years, but we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what they call these programs. Programs aimed at allowing people to have jobs sometimes just because the color of their skin, not that they're the most qualified. And the American people are also demanding that illegal immigrants be deported. We're seeing this happen now. All you have to do is turn on newscasts, especially those who are convicted criminals and members of violent gangs. The new administration has begun to aggressively deport illegal immigrants, especially those who are convicted criminals. And as I said, members of violent gangs. President Trump had to negotiate with some of their home countries to get them to accept their return. Now, those that oppose the deportation of illegal immigrants seem to think there is an immorality associated with enforcing our immigration laws. And they don't view these people as criminals. Now, I've spoken about this flawed logic in previous podcasts. In an effort to gain an understanding of the inefficient staffing in government offices and organizations, the Trump administration offered a separation package to governmental employees. Again, somehow this action has been opposed, being viewed as inhumane and immoral. I don't know what that means. Maybe what goes on in Washington is if you get a job there, it's supposed to be for a lifetime. Of course, we all know that corporations routinely use this technique to streamline their staffing. And President Trump has been using executive order tools to remove corruption and inefficiency across government institutions. Much has been written in recent days about DEI programs that have resulted in marginally qualified people filling critical positions. Some have even speculated that these programs contributed to less qualified individuals and inadequate staffing in air traffic control towers. The new mantra in Washington is that hiring and staffing should be on a merit basis, meaning that regardless of skin color and sexual preferences, the most qualified people should be hired. We find those who support these DEI programs arguing that these programs are morally justified because they ensure everyone has something of value to offer society and get to participate. Now, does that sound a lot like some form of socialism to you? It sure does to me. Now, one of the first places that President Trump sent his consultant, Elon Musk, and that's exactly what he is. He's not elected. He's not a government employee. He's a consultant to our president. And the president sent him to the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. For decades, this agency has been unaccountable to taxpayers as it allowed massive sums of money to go to ridiculous and, in many cases, malicious pet projects of entrenched bureaucrats with next to no oversight. I've said on this podcast several times that one of the most upsetting moments during the past 4 years under the Biden administration is when we observed topless transgenders dancing on the lawn of the White House with gay flags draped over this governmental building. So I was not surprised that some of the waste and abuse found at USAID reflected this kind of evil. Elon Musk and his team, known as the Department of Governmental Efficiency, DOGE, which, by the way, was proposed as part of President Trump's election campaign, they quickly uncovered things like $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia workplaces, $70,000 for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 to support a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 to produce a transgender comic book in Peru, $2 million for sex changes and LGBTQ activism in Guatemala, and $50 million to fund condoms in Gaza. That's a lot of condoms. Are you kidding me? And along the way, other abuses of taxpayer money was uncovered, like $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam, and $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt. Hundreds of thousands of dollars linked to terrorist organizations, and hundreds of thousands of meals went to Al-Qaeda affiliated fighters in Syria. I mean, this is direct support of what we refer to as the enemy. Funding was provided to provide personalized contraceptive birth control devices in developing countries. And then hundreds of millions of dollars were spent to fund irrigation canals and farming equipment and even fertilizer that was used to support, the production of poppy fields and heroin, benefiting the Taliban. And now we learn that tens of millions of dollars were paid to celebrities to visit Ukraine. I saw a whole list of this where, the top one was an actress who got $20 million to go visit Ukraine. The list goes on, and it's all been happening for decades. It's no wonder that President Donald Trump said that USAID has been run by a bunch of radical lunatics. On his first day in his office, he signed an executive order suspending foreign assistance for 90 days, which has been legally challenged. Appears from what we might call leftist woke judges, and he's attempted to suspend contracts and grants for a similar amount of time. They're simply trying to get their arms wrapped around the extent and the depth of corruption and mismanagement. He's made it clear that he realizes that humanitarian aid from the U.S. government is very important, but it must be managed in a totally different way. Now, I've been reminding those around me and our listeners that almost half the country voted for Trump's opponent. Therefore, don't think that his efforts to eliminate corruption and bring efficiency will be easy. His political opponents are going to use everything at their disposal to get in his way. Including shouting profanities in the streets. Everything to stop and slow down the Trump administration progress on these priorities. And in his book entitled Woke Jesus, Lucas Miles points out that the political left and right, both the left and right in our country, apparently agree on one thing, that our country is in a moral crisis. Now, if you find yourself firmly on the side of the conservative right, the idea that progressives are concerned at all with morality may come as a shock to you. However, as I've already been pointing out in this podcast, when you hear political leaders like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, stating over and over again that deportation that results in separating families is a moral crisis, this is not just political theater. Miles tells us in his book that the left that they're not being inauthentic, that they're demonstrating an elite moral tapestry, constantly evolving and twisting, that they use to assume power and wage war against anyone who stands in their way. Far from being the godless party they once were thought to be, the radicals on the left have made it abundantly clear that their sanctuary is the environment, and their method of worship is sexuality, and that their God is the state. Now, President Trump recently signed an executive order banning biological males, transgender women, from competing in female sports. There have been numerous stories about how young female athletes have had their athletic achievements stolen by biological male athletes who are allowed to compete in their sports. This seems so illogical that we have to wonder how we ever got to this place in our society. I think the answer is when our society began to accept homosexuality as normal, it was inevitable that we would soon be hearing that there are not just two genders. How many are there? I think, God has told us there are two genders. He made a man and a woman. But there are those that don't agree with us. And then, we see a Supreme Court justice appointed who cannot even explain the difference between a man and a woman. And we see trained physicians trying to convince us that a biological male can have a baby. And here we are in our country assisting young people to change their sex and allow biological males to compete in female sports. These ideas are not only mind-boggling, they're not just mind-boggling, they're evil, and they're a form of corruption. Corruption is a serious issue that affects all of society, especially within governmental structures. As corruption, seeps into the leadership and decision-making, it leads to injustice. Our values, they have to be grounded in God's truth. Now, God's intention for us is fairness and morality. So it's important that we remain vigilant, holding our leaders accountable for their actions. Proverbs 29:12 warns that if a ruler listens to the lies, all his officials will become wicked. And I think we've seen that prediction of Proverbs 28:15. Like a roaring lion or a charging bear is a wicked ruler over a helpless people. Now, I'm praying that the Trump administration senses that it's their responsibility to uphold justice and serve with integrity. And Trump, I think because of his background, we have a leader who can strive to reflect God's character and always work for the good of people rather than his own interest. Much has been said about that, and we don't have a man who needs to aggregate additional wealth, or for that matter, additional power. Professed Christians should be praying for our leaders and the decisions that they make, ensuring that they align with God's principles of love, justice, and mercy. 1 Timothy 2:1-2 teaches that petitions, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority. It's very important for professed Christians to have an active prayer life that includes praying for those in authority. As this newly created Department of Governmental Efficiency, DOGE, uncovers corruption, we are beginning to see how far-reaching some of these practices can be. And it's not just about avoiding misspent tax dollars, but it's also about preventing taxpayers from being forced to invest in things that we find totally out of line with our moral convictions. It's awareness and accountability both play a vital role in upholding justice. What I'm saying is that all of us must remain steadfast in our commitment to truth and justice and demand transparency and become active participants in promoting change in our society. The prophet Ezekiel describes our evil leaders as wolves stealing their prey. They shed blood and take illegal gain. But then we could be encouraged by the words in Isaiah 3:13-15 when the prophet tells us the Lord takes his place in court. He rises to judge the people. The Lord enters into judgment against the elders and leaders of his people. Yes, there will be judging. Now, those of us who profess to be followers of Christ, we're called to be advocates for justice and to stand up against corruption in all forms. The Bible underscores the importance of acting in righteousness and bringing light to every dark corner of societal oppression. We're in a very special time in America when Christians should be lifting our voices in protest against injustice and support fairness in our government. Yes, our hearts, they must be aligned with God's desire for justice. And we can play a role in the attempt of this new administration to eliminate corruption and bring efficiency to our government. I sometimes wear a t-shirt with Micah 6:8 spelled out. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Now, Isaiah 1:17 tells us, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. And in Psalms 33:5, it tells us the Lord loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of his unfailing love. Followers of Jesus Christ have an important role to play in our society. The Bible encourages us to be engaged citizens. And, we should not just passively observe wrongdoing. With all of these new revelations, you just wonder, is that what we've been doing, and just passively sitting back and letting things go, knowing full well that corruption is underway? No, we're being asked to actively participate in our government through our votes, our actions, and our voices. Now, sometimes we feel weak and overwhelmed, but God is calling us to be instruments of change for good. The scripture tells us in Romans 13 that we should be subject to governing authorities because there's no authority except that which God has established. And then in Titus 3:1 we read, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good. An important phrase. Be subject to our rulers, our leaders, our president, our senators, our congressmen, on and on. Yes, whatever is good. Now, these verses, they're not teaching us to follow government authorities when we see evil and injustice and corruption and misspent monies. I've discussed in previous podcasts, we have numerous biblical examples of civil disobedience when it was clear that believers were facing evil. From the Hebrew midwives who defied the orders of Pharaoh and kept Hebrew male babies alive, to the parents of Moses who hid the baby for 3 months, to the famous story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who defied King Nebuchadnezzar and refused to bow down to his image, to Daniel who defied the edict to not worship any god but the king, and was thrown into the lion's den. To the wise men who disobeyed Herod and did not report the location of baby Jesus. And then numerous acts of the disciples. Now, as this podcast begins to wind down, yes, we're observing evil forces in America, shouting obscenities in the streets in an effort to thwart the efforts of our newly elected president. I'm reminded that we Christians have a mighty tool to bring about change in our world, especially when it comes to corruption. James 5:16 reminds us, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. No matter the depth of corruption in government, the Bible is encouraging us to hold on to hope. Believers, this is not the time for us to falter or shrink back. Over the last 4 years, I have participated in a number of prayer services for our nation. 2 Chronicles 7:14 is often quoted in these services. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now, during this time of change in our nation, we need to be reminding those around us and the leaders in the Trump administration that God will heal our land if we remain steadfast in our trust in Him. Thank you for listening to me today, and do not give up hope. Let's place our trust in God. Thank you for listening. God bless you.